In this video, we're going to talk about the repetition structure. A repetition is just repeating something over and over and over again. So for example, if I were going to have you print, say, numbers 1 through 10 to screen, you'd do something like this. First, you'd do sys.out.println, you'd put a 1, then you'd copy and paste that line and replacing the ones with 2 through 10. If you were really creative, you might even try something like this. Instead of using the sys.out.println, you'd use your escape sequences, replacing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Thank you, Shelby Schlicker. Great idea. So, whether it be sys.out.println 1 or using the escape sequences, what we really notice here is when you're looking at it, we've got a pattern. Now, doing 1 through 10, this is okay. You're not going to get too frustrated. But what if I had you do 1 through 100, 1 through 1,000, or 1,000,000? You really wouldn't want to do that. You'd probably be pretty mad at me if I made you type that up and do that, even though it is easy. Thing is, humans don't like repetition. We get bored with it. It's tedious, it's time-consuming, and we want better ways. Computers, on the other hand, they love repeating things. It's kind of what they live for. Computers love doing things over and over and over again. They don't get tired of it. They don't get bored with it. So what we have is the loop. And the loop is a repetition structure, a way for the computer to repeat things over and over and over again. So if we take a look at what we have so far, we'll just go ahead and compile and run this. And there's our numbers 1 through 10, and there it is again, 1 through 10. Okay, that's these two lines right here, and then line 17. We're going to get rid of these now. We don't really need them anymore, just to make the point. What we do want to do is print those numbers 1 through 10, but we want to do it without having to type each individual line. So what we're going to do is we're going to create what's called the while loop. Now the while loop is a pretest loop, which means it might not ever run. And we'll explain how that works in just a second. First, what is a loop? How do you create one? Well, I'm going to start with what we already know, and that's an if statement. So we say if 1, okay, if 1 is less than or equal to 10, then we want to execute some code. And the code we're going to execute in this case is we're just going to do a system.out.println. And let's go ahead and print the number 1 here. All right. So, what we already know how to do, if this is true, execute this, if this condition is true, execute the code between the curly brackets. So, 1 is less than or equal to 10. That is a true statement. So we are going to get sys.out.println. We're going to get number 1 printed to the console window. We're going to compile, run. There's your 1. Okay, we know how to do this. Nothing fantastic here. So how do we create a loop? Well, almost the same way. Works just like an if statement, except we replace the word if with the word while. So while this condition is true, execute this code. So in an if statement, what would happen is, if this were true, execute the condition, and then at 12, we would leave. We're done. Okay? If this isn't true, skip everything between 10 and 12, jump to whatever code is on 13. That's how an if statement works. Whiles work exactly the same way in construction. While this is a true statement, execute this code. Where an if statement leaves, the while statement, when it gets to line 12, it goes back and it rechecks the condition. Okay, so it loops, it repeats. And it says, okay, well, while 1 is less than or equal to 10, execute this code, get to line 12, and go check it again. While 1 is less than or equal to 10, execute this code. So whenever we compile and run this, where an if statement just gave us 1, 1, the while, as you can see, is giving us a whole bunch of 1s. Okay, see how these 1s, these are going, this is what's called an infinite loop. And what an infinite loop means is that it's going to run forever. Okay, you and I both know it's not going to actually run forever. What's actually happening is the computer resources and memory is being drawn from this loop, because it is infinite and it keeps printing 1 to the screen, and eventually it's going to draw all the resources and make the system crash. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to stop this. But this is an infinite loop, okay? It just continues to run. Because 1 is always less than or equal to 10, so this will continually run. It's infinitely, until the computer runs out, gets unplugged, stops or breaks. So what we want to do is we need to make this so it can leave, it can get out of here. So anytime you use a while loop, there's always something you want to do beforehand, and you want to create something called a counter. Now a counter is just a variable name. I always use the word counter. You can actually use anything you want to, but I'm going to say int counter, and I'm going to set that equal to 0. Okay, so int counter equals 0. Now that I have my int counter equal to 0, what I'm going to do is I'm going to replace this 1, okay, while counter is less than or equal to 10. Cool. So now I'm not actually using a number here, okay? I'm not using a literal number, I'm using a variable, which is my counter. We'll compile, and now we're going to run this. And alas, we have the same problem. Okay, this is still an infinite loop because counter has a value of 0, and 0 is less than or equal to 10. So 0 less than or equal to 10, true, print 1, 0 less than or equal to 10, true, print 1, 0, and we're caught in this infinite loop again. So this is the second part. Not only do you need to declare a counter, we actually need to use it. Okay, and we'll exit on out of here. This is what's called an incrementer. So I'm going to increment counter. And so now what happens is we're going to say counter plus plus. And what that does is this says each time we go through the loop, and that's called an iteration, each time we iterate through the loop, counter is going to increase by 1. So now let's watch it. If we compile and press run, we get a series of 1s here. Okay, well, how many 1s did we get? I'm not exactly sure. Let's go ahead and instead of print 1s, let's print counter. That way we can follow the value of counter as it changes. So we'll take that, we'll increment, and there's 0 through 10. So what happened in code? Well, right here, we declared counter as 0. So while 0 is less than or equal to 10, that's a true statement, we printed the value of counter, so we printed 0. And then we added 1 to 0, so counter plus plus, that took 0, went up to 1. We got to 15, we checked the value of counter again. Counter is no longer 0, it is now 1. So while 1 is less than or equal to 10, that's still true. We print 1, add 1 to counter, continue on all the way through, looping back in, or continually to loop. Each time we increment through the loop, or each time we iterate through the loop, we increment counter by 1 until we're at, let's say, counter equals 9. Okay, so counter is 9. 9 is less than or equal to 10. That's a true statement. Print 9. Counter, add 1 more. Counter is 10. Go to the top. Counter less than or 10 is less than or equal to 10. True statement. Print 10. Counter is 11. 11 less than or equal to 10. That is now a false statement. Once we have a false statement, just like an if statement, we go to our very last line, we go to our last curly bracket in the in this case is line 15, and we exit out of our loop. So now counter has a value of 11. Okay, and that is that's how a loop or a repetition structure works. So the while, we call this a pretest loop. Well, why is it pretest? Because it might not ever run. Why might it not ever run? Well, remember, this condition has to be true to get inside of this loop. However, it checks the condition before it even enters the loop. It looks at the value of counter. Counter equals 0. So let's go ahead and let's set counter equal to 11. And if we compile that, because it's a pretest, it might not ever run, we're going to press, or after we compile it, 11 is less than or equal to 10. This is a false statement, meaning none of this ever executed. Okay? Looked at the first line of code and went to line 16 because this was false. That is the first of 3 loops. That is called the while, that is called the while loop. It is a pretest loop.